Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this very special edition of Virtual Mental Office Hours, which is co-presented or co-brought to you this evening by Anton Haswell and Rebecca Lockwood, who are both out of the Toronto School of Management at the moment. And tonight they're going to be sharing years worth of legal research and writing experience, and also just members of the bar as well in the law school journey. So Anton, I'm going to hand over to you and Rebecca to share your story and presentation on legal research and writing this evening for us.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Siobhan. Hi, everybody. Again, I guess start from the beginning. My name's Anton. I'm the director of Canadian Legal Education Accreditation with the Toronto School of Management's NCA exam prep program. And the reason I'm here today is because, I don't have nearly as much experience with Canadian legal research and writing as Rebecca does. Rebecca is the expert and the star of the show in this one. So technical questions like that can be definitely reverted to Rebecca. But I think what I can do is offer some really interesting anecdotal and nuanced information. I've spoken with, let me see if I can share my screen for you guys, just to give you an idea. So I've spoken with really key stakeholders from across the internationally trained lawyer journey spectrum. From left to right on the computer screen there, that's Dr. Kara Mitchell-Moore. She's head or CEO of CPLED. So those of you in provinces where CPLED is a mandatory course of action for you to take in order to be a lawyer in that province, you'll probably be familiar with her. In the middle is Gina Alexandres, and she's the head of the Ryerson LPP program, which is an articling equivalent. And of course, to the right is Deborah Wolf, who's the executive director of the NCA. So it's really hard to get those three in one room, not to mention a webinar like this together, but I've spoken to all three of these individuals. Some I have a podcast, so if you guys don't know, but some of them have already been published, and others, the interviews have been done and they will be published. So you'll have an opportunity to download them and listen to them themselves. But I think what I can offer in this presentation is their perspective on the importance of, and the growing importance and the growing realization of the importance of legal research and writing in the journey to become a lawyer, practicing lawyer in Canada. And I suppose, Rebecca, it makes sense for you to introduce yourself next. I don't want to keep rambling, and then I'll jump sort of back into some of the insights that I've learned in working with and speaking to these major stakeholders in the NCA journey.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So as Anton said, my name is Rebecca Lockwood, and I am the president and founder of Grammatica International. And I work with Anton as the lead curriculum developer and designer for the NCA exam prep program at the Toronto School of Management. But I'm going to talk more about my Grammatica side of work today because we're focusing on legal writing. So I started Grammatica in 2012. I was actually in the midst of doing my own law degree in Canada, my JD. Prior to going to law school, I was working in Spain for a number of years, working in bilingual curriculum development and teaching there. And I realized once I came to Canada to start my own law career, I'm from Toronto originally, so I was coming back to Canada, I should say. I realized that law is a language in and of itself. And there's a particular way of writing and right down to the structure of your sentences and the style of your sentences. And that sort of got me thinking about legal writing and the specialty that is. Since that time, I have gone on to teach literally hundreds of students from around the world. And I specialize in legal writing and communications and legal skills more generally. So Grammatica designs professional development programs in legal communications and other legal skills. And sometimes I venture off and do other things like NCA prep. I've also taught in the UK. I taught at a university there. And I taught students. It was a very diverse group of students I taught there. Most of them were English or British students who were studying there. But in the course of my experience teaching students from Canada, from the UK, from all over the world, internationally trained lawyers and otherwise, and also being somewhat of an internationally trained lawyer myself in the reverse now. So I'm Canadian, I'm a Canadian lawyer, I'm licensed in Ontario, but I have worked in the UK and I'm currently calling in from Australia. So I know what it's like to be a lawyer abroad, not in your home jurisdiction. And I can tell you that every jurisdiction definitely has its own style. Even the difference between the UK and Canada was slightly different. And there were things that I had to adapt to, and I also had to learn to teach to adapt to. But one thing I can say about writing generally is that no matter where you're from, no matter how strong you think you are in writing, you can always improve it. My father, who's been an editor for almost 50 years of his life, it has been his whole career, he can improve his writing and he strives to all the time. So some of the response that I get when I start teaching a course is people don't really want to engage in their or focus on their legal writing and just writing skills generally because they feel like they've already got it down. And that's not what they need to know. They need to work on the, the substantive law. And absolutely, you do need to know the substantive law to get ahead. But what legal writing does and what working on your legal writing does, it polishes off those documents, whether it's an application for a job or a submission to the court. If you have a polished product and it looks good, it is grammatically correct, the structure of the sentences and the structure of the whole thing makes sense and has a logical flow, and it fits the style of the audience that you are writing to, it's going to make an infinite difference in the success of that application or submission. So legal writing, and I have taught students who are Canadian students who have studied abroad and come back, who are internationally trained lawyers whose first language is not English and have come to Canada, and everything in between. So it's really not, there's no, and of course you're all here today and interested in this topic, so you also understand the importance of legal writing and legal research and the importance of honing those skills, and perhaps the difference between your home jurisdiction, whether that home jurisdiction is Montreal or India or Brazil, that there's lots we can tweak and improve to make that transition into a new jurisdiction more seamless.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And that sort of echoes some of the sentiments that I was talking about earlier in terms of me interviewing and learning from the key stakeholders in the NCA journey, Rebecca, that everybody can benefit from this, but particularly for those where Canada is a foreign jurisdiction or a new jurisdiction, there are things that you need to pay attention to in your legal writing that sometimes isn't, like you said, people don't really think of that. They think, and it makes sense. And I've heard from Gina from Ryerson's LPP that when you come to Canada, you're confronted with having to complete the NCA exam process, however you choose to do that, whether that's through an LLM or doing self-study, completing the exams. And then you have to complete the bar exam process in the province you want to practice in. And then you have to worry about getting a job. So there's a lot of things that you would think are way more important than honing your skills and worrying about syntax and sentence structure and things like that. But really, it's being now being made a priority within the internationally trained lawyer journey. And it's going to be evidenced in a few years. I've spoken to Deborah. The podcast is available for download, and I guess at the end of this we can give the link to that if people are interested. But in that podcast, she had mentioned that what they're seeing is that candidates, like Rebecca, you alluded to, candidates are reasonably proficient in black letter law, the ability to understand the law and reference law. But what candidates seem to be struggling a little bit in is their communication and writing skills. And so the NCA, as a result of this, and it's been years they published a report in 2017, and now they're embarking on making legal research and writing required course for you to take. So there are 5 core modules that you must take. Everybody's probably familiar with that by now, but Canadian legal research and writing will be another one of them in a few years. So that's pretty substantial. And they're looking at moving their assessment from an assessment-based exam structure to a competency-based exam structure. And I know, Rebecca, you can speak more about what exactly that means, but it is a shift in the way that the NCA is going to start looking at how they evaluate your credentials and your ability to enter the Canadian legal profession. So that's from the NCA side of things. And they're working with Dr. Mitchell-Moore and CPLED, who's on the left side there, to develop a Canadian legal writing course. They call it Canadian Legal Communication, I believe. That's available now, actually, and that will soon be made mandatory. And so that's just an example of how important these key stakeholders are looking at legal communication. And again, they all understand. And the reason I think they're making this mandatory, if I can assume something, is because they do understand that in an assessment-based environment, you have to sort of get your exams done, and you can kind of avoid or not sort of focus on the soft skills that you're developing and in favor of just getting through the exams. But now the exams are going to be including this legal communication course. So I just found that really interesting, and I think it's something that future NCA candidates, you may not have to deal with it right now, but future NCA candidates will. And given that future NCA candidates will have to deal with it, it's worthwhile to look into how you now can hone your legal communication skills. Rebecca, I'll hand it over to you again.
Yeah, so I imagine that people will have specific questions on how to improve legal writing. So what Anton and I thought we'd do today is I'll give my sort of quick tips and my experience with legal writing and legal research and how to improve and where to improve, and sort of some good tools you can use for free to do so. And then we thought we'd open it up to questions. And Siobhan, I know that you received some questions via email, or you asked for them. So we're going to save a good portion of our chat today for that, I think. So just a bit more background. I teach and I run my own courses through Grammatic International. And I also teach at Osgood. I teach an introductory course every August before the LLM. And I see that I think, John, you are starting the LLM at Osgood in January. So I'm teaching that course as well, the intro course in January. So I might see you then, depending on if you're in my section or not. And that is basically a legal writing course and an introduction to Canadian law and the Canadian legal system. And I've taught such courses abroad in the UK as well. And I've tutored students in the same subject. And it covers legal research as well. So I literally have taught hundreds and hundreds of students on this topic since 2012. And I'm kind of a grammar freak myself. So, let's talk about the Oxford comma if you really want to, because I could go on. This is definitely coming from my editor father. I have lots to say on the topic, and my mind is so full, but I don't also want to just ramble. So just quickly, some of the things that come to mind that I've seen on the student side of things when I'm teaching legal writing, when I'm marking work, one of the first things that comes to mind is structure. Having a solid structure that follows the format of the document you need to write, whether it's a memo or an essay or a submission or a CV or a cover letter. If you follow sort of the correct format, and that depends on where you're practicing, of course, but if you follow the correct format and you also have a clear structure, period, that is going to make a world of difference to your writing. And I've already mentioned that in my introduction, and if you're in my class, you'll hear me say it all the time, but structure right down to the sentence individually makes a big deal, makes a big difference rather. So and you always want to think about, what's the point you're trying to make? Let's consider a cover letter, because I think a lot of people will be applying for jobs soon. in the cover letter, the point you're trying to make is hire me. But also, more specifically, you want to say, hire me because I am so great, and this is what I've done, and this is how I will help you. So in your introductory paragraph in a cover letter, you're going to want to say exactly that. I am so-and-so, I have these credentials, I'm applying to this position, and I want to work with you because. So you want to start off really strong. And the same goes for a factum to the federal court, if that's what you're writing. You want to start off with the main point. So in that introduction, you're going to, whatever the document is, you want to be very clear about what you want to say. And that kind of brings me on to my second point, which I'll go back to structure in a second. But my second point is clarity is key. And structure will help you be more clear in your writing. But you have to think that whoever's reading your work is going to, they want to understand what you're saying. And you also want to make it easy for them to understand what you're saying. So if you are, if you start off with your main point, the reader is going to know from the very beginning, okay, this is what this person wants me to understand. And they're going to read through your work, and they're going to be looking for that the whole way through. It also means, clarity also means that one sentence can't go on for 7 lines. I think in other jurisdictions, and I've worked in Spain, not in a legal capacity, but I worked in a professional capacity in Spain, and I saw just how different the style of writing was there. And I've since seen Spanish legal writing, and it is much more flowery and much more elaborate than I think the style of Canadian legal writing. So a lot of people will tell me, but Rebecca, this seems so simple. You know, what you're telling me is to really simplify it down, and that seems like I'm not showing my intellect enough. And in fact, it's the opposite of that. You can fit in, you know, a piece of vocabulary that shows your understanding of the context of contract law, let's say. But you can also just keep your sentences short and sweet. Make it really clear what your point is, both in the sentences and in sort of the paragraph or the overall document. But clarity is key. And once you go through it, once you read through it, you want to make sure that it's at every section, the main point is understood. The overarching point, so hire me because, but also the point of your different paragraphs or your different sections. So hire me because I am an excellent researcher, right? And then you go through and explain your experience in legal research. I see, Daniela, that you're from Chile, so you know about the Spanish legal writing idiosyncrasies, let's say. And now every jurisdiction has it. I've also worked in India. I was at one point running my own immigration and refugee law practice, and I was living between Canada and India for some time, and I worked with a firm there, and they sort of in partnership with each other, and their style of writing was very different from my style of writing. So we had to adapt each other's work when we were writing to whichever court or authority, whether it was in India or in Canada. So I do have some, I understand the context from which many people are coming from, and the difference between where you're starting from, where you have to get to in terms of Canadian legal writing. So I've talked about structure, I've talked about clarity. I'm going to talk about grammar, which is boring, and everyone hates when I talk about it. And whenever I include a specific grammar lesson in anything I do, everyone's just sort of like, yeah, you know, Rebecca, we know this. But actually, many people don't know it. And there's so many little rules, in fact, and it is boring, but if you can just polish up your work, even just that little bit, it'll make a big difference. So one thing I always tell my students is word check is fine. It'll, you know, spell check, I mean, on Microsoft Word is fine. It'll catch some errors, but not everything. And it certainly doesn't catch more complex grammar errors. But one piece of software that I have found actually quite useful is Grammarly.com. There's a free version where you can upload your work online, Grammarly.com, and it'll check your work for you. But you can't download the corrected version. You actually have to pay for that. But Grammarly still, even the free version still is good, just to give you an idea of, you know, what kind of mistakes you're making. and how to correct them. And also Grammarly gives a good explanation as to why it's incorrect, or what the correct version should look like. And another little tool that I often suggest people use is a style guide. So you might want to check out the AP style guide, the Associated Press style guide, or the Strunk and White style guide. And this is what a lot of journalists would use and have it beside them to check, any questions about grammar that comes up, or should I put a comma here? Is that right? Am I using semicolons the right way? And so those, I read those for fun because I'm just like that. But if you have it, thinking about it, just as a tool you can use and have with you, though that will really help too. And I say this because grammar is like the icing on the cake. Grammar is something that we think that we know, as I said before, but in actual fact, it's easy to make mistakes, and it's also easy to improve it. So if you have those books with you, or those tools with you nearby as you're writing, you'll find that you're going to start noticing, oh, okay, I often misplace a comma right before because, when there's never actually supposed to be a comma before because. You don't use commas the way that you speak and you pause in oral speech. So you have to change the way you think about commas, let's say. So that's just one example. But also another trick that I've learned, or not a trick, but a little piece of insight that I've learned is that judges are grammar freaks too. I have a few friends who have clerked at the federal court and the Court of Appeal, and everyone comes back to me and says, Rebecca, the judges would love Grammatica because we talk about the Oxford comma all the time. So it's also good to know that the people that you're writing to are paying attention to these things. It might be different, if you're writing to your boss and you're writing a memo, and you know that in an inter-office memo, they're not really going to care. They just want to know the main gist of it. But if you're writing something formal for a course or the court or opposing counsel, you don't want to leave any room for doubt in your writing. Multiple typos, multiple grammar errors or spelling errors will leave that room for doubt. And I know for sure that especially at some larger firms that receive a lot of applications, one typo, one mistake, and your application is tossed. So not to scare you, but it just means that this is a good reason to improve these skills. And you guys know that already because you're here and we're chatting about it. So I've talked about structure, I've talked about clarity, I've talked about grammar. Let's quickly, those are my sort of quick top 3 tips for legal writing. When it comes to legal research, I'd say, style matters again. And so the McGill Style Guide is the sort of style guide of choice in Canada. You can find that online for free at a lot of law school websites will have those for free, or you can buy a copy at sort of usually an academic bookstore. And that's how you format citations. And that also matters too. And maybe if you're, coming from a different jurisdiction where there wasn't very much focus there in terms of how to structure the citations or footnotes of a, submission to the court. If that's not an important thing for you in your home jurisdiction, just know that it is important here in Canada, especially anything formal that's going to the court or, a professor in an academic program. I think most people will probably already have heard of canly.org. I see that a lot of you in the chat are from or have already done the NCA exams and are looking to come over to, maybe switch provinces or move to Canada. I'm just quickly checking. Okay. So I just saw some questions online. Sorry, I got distracted there with the chat, but I'll get to those questions in a second. Canly.org is a really good free resource for legal research. You can find You can find cases, legislation. You can also find commentaries as well, such as case critiques. And that's a good idea to help you understand what other Canadian legal writing looks like, what the style sounds like, and also give you an idea, just give you some context about a certain case. And it'll also maybe link you to some lawyers who are working in the area, because those comments on Canley, it's actually Canley Connects is the commentary section. Those critiques and the summaries on Canley Connects are written by lawyers, practicing lawyers in Canada. So that's another way, if you're interested in employment law, let's say, and you're looking up a recent employment case and you notice that there's a lawyer who often writes comments on recent cases, then you'll see that you can sort of connect with that lawyer, maybe reach out to them. So Canley, I think Canley is terrific. It's really, really good. Now let me see. I think maybe what we'll do now is open it up to questions, because it's already 8 and half an hour has passed. Siobhan and Anton, does that sound like a good idea?
Sounds like a fantastic idea.
Sure.
We've had a couple come in.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have managed to answer each other's questions, which is fantastic. I love it when we have audience participation. Everyone helps. It's like we're crowdsourcing answers for everybody. But just scrolling through, we had one that came in via email ahead of time, which was, can you give some kind of idea about the easiest way to quickly identify the holding and reasoning of a case? Now, this probably follows quite nicely from your Canley.
Yes. So sometimes, if you're lucky, a case will have a commentary or a summary already, and that will give you the sort of the answer, or at least direct you to the answer. But I also always tell people, don't ignore the header in a decision, because often the answer, the holding and the reasoning is right up there, right up top. The ratio is there as well. So you can see, it'll have keywords, Section 7, Charter, Administrative Law. So you'll understand the topic, but usually there'll be some description, certainly in cases that are from higher courts. So you'll be able to find those descriptions, and if you just read that header, that will give you a good idea of the reasoning of the court, or the decision of the court, and why they make that decision.
Great point. This is more of a generic question. Ricky, would you like to ask your question? You can unmute yourself and ask it to Rebecca directly.
Anton, do you want to take down the slide so I can see?
Yeah, I'll just stop the share. There we go. There we all are.
Is Ricky still online?
And I'll wait for Ricky, but I'll just add to the Grammarly. I have the widget, whatever, installed on my browser, and it saves my life when I'm drafting emails. So I can't agree enough about Grammarly. It's really great.
Ricky, if you don't want to ask it, I can ask it for you. That's not a problem. The question was, how big a challenge is it to shift practice to a jurisdiction where English is a first language?
Right. So I think that generally speaking, if English is not your first language and you're practicing in another language that's not English right now, you're going to have a slightly more of a jump to make it over the line into practicing in English. Not to say that it's not impossible at all, or you can't do it very, very well, but it is a little bit more complicated because you are, and I know this because I speak other languages as well, you're sort of working to understand what you're reading and what you're trying to write at the same time as you're trying to craft it. However, by that same token, because English is not your first language, you're probably more aware of grammar and writing. And so when you are, trying to improve your writing, you'll understand, okay, I need to work on this, or I need to work on that. And you'll be able to incorporate that a lot easier. I do find that students whose first language isn't English do tend to incorporate feedback a lot quicker, because they've already perhaps identified that themselves. So what I would say is it might be a little bit tricky at first, but just keep trying and try out some of those resources I mentioned. Maybe look into a course, and I think that you'll be right as rain.
Hopefully that answers your question, Ricky. Do you have any additional books or resources that people can use to upskill themselves on their legal research and writing?
So in the course that I teach at Osgood, we used to use a textbook called The Law Workbook by Shelley Kierstead. And I find that very helpful for legal research. It goes through the steps on how to do a search, how to understand and read, statutes, cases, and also how to structure, sort of generally speaking, how to research and the steps you should go through to research, like a predictive analysis exercise, or in other words, a memo. And I do find that very useful. Now in that course, we've only used portions of the book, but I find the whole book quite handy. There are some legal writing textbooks out there, but most of them are based in England, and so it's sort of British English or American English, and also the American legal system. So the English is perhaps similar, but the context is very different. So I would just warn you that if you're going to look at legal writing textbooks, that often the legal context is going to be different to Canada, and so some things may not make sense to you. And also you shouldn't take it as a textbook for the law either, because it's not. It's going to be about, just look at it for the language.
That's super useful. I would have just assumed that any book that said legal research, they were all of an equal playing field and equally applicable, but you make a very valid point. Every jurisdiction has its own little nuances. So I guess unless the guide or the textbook is written for the jurisdiction in which you're working in, it may not have some of those nuances that make you sound like you're actually, you've been here a while doing it.
Yeah, well, this is secret, well, not so secretly now, but something I've been trying to work on for a long time. A Canadian legal writing handbook, because there isn't really one. The Law Workbook does do a great job with legal research, I'd say, but legal writing is a little bit different.
Absolutely. I put a link to the textbook in the chat for everyone if you're interested in the book. There are other retailers. I think that's just the publisher, so I'm sure you'll find it in other places as well. Param, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Siobhan. Hi, Rebecca. This is Param from Surrey, British Columbia. So my question is, as a general practice, do the legal documents or submissions, should they be like highly technical legal, or a simple plain English is preferred here in Canada, or will it change from province to province? Thank you.
I think generally there's a shift towards plain English in Canada, and in the US and in the UK. But of course, there are certain terms that you can't get away from. If there's, cases will determine a particular word with a particular definition, and you need to use that to make yourself understood. So, don't try and paraphrase a specific definition for the sake of, plain language. Generally speaking, your sentences can be sort of more simple and straightforward, but yeah, you want to make sure you're still using the technical language when you need to, but definitely legalese is not the style of choice these days.
Thank you. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Does anybody else have any questions before Anton and I chime in with our thought process? Mm-hmm. You can say no, it's fine. You can just listen. We don't judge. All right,
Yeah,
Anton.
well, maybe I'll ask Rebecca a pretty easy question to lay up. What if somebody is interested in improving their legal English skills, and they've read some books and they're looking at things, but they really feel a little bit lost as to how they can seriously improve what they think they need to improve or what they've been told to improve? I've heard taking courses is a good idea because you can get feedback. Feedback is really important. So like reading a book, I would imagine, and trying to do it yourself is one way. But can you maybe speak to the importance of what that feedback is like and why it's so valuable?
Sure. So this is going to be a little plug for myself, of course, at the moment. So I'm currently working on, when I was in Toronto, I would run webinars, or not webinars, sorry, workshops, and they would connect to each other. It was sort of a legal writing workshop series. And I'm working on putting that all online. And I'd love, Siobhan, if this is okay with you, I'll once it's all ready to go, I'll send you a discount code so you can share it with the listeners here. It's not going to be very expensive. It's going to be affordable, but I'll make it even more affordable. But the idea with a course is that you can, get some guidance, some structured guidance on how to go through, let's say, a textbook or an example, but also having personalized feedback is really important because, of course, all of us write differently. We all have our own personal styles. And we have our own idiosyncrasies and make our own mistakes all the time. So it is helpful to have somebody chime in and say, have you noticed that you're doing this quite a lot? In the courses that I've taught, for my own grammatical courses and then also at Osgood and other places, we had a really big focus on feedback. So the webinar series that I'm going to be putting out is going to include an option, not a mandatory thing, but an option if you want to submit, an assignment, then you can do so as an option, and then I and my team will mark it and give you some feedback. So I do think there's definitely benefit to having some personalized guidance if you can manage it and fit it in. And yeah, I mean, I think it depends on you and the kind of learner you are.
Mm-hmm. And I had another question. Sorry, Siobhan, I'll just ask it quickly. It just dawned on me. I'm wondering, technology is advancing. We're using things like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and we're using a lot of those things to communicate with each other as friends. But also I wonder, in your experience, or if you have any insight into how it's now sort of infiltrating the legal profession, and how should people be careful of their language on things like WhatsApp, because it instead of an email, let's say if you're communicating with a client via WhatsApp, it almost automatically starts you off on a foot where it's a little bit more casual, but I sense that maybe it shouldn't be. And I think as you're growing as a lawyer, and maybe you've started out on your own, in client acquisition so important, maybe could you speak a little bit to how things like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger should be treated by lawyers?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great question. So I would say, before getting to WhatsApp, I think that email, we also consider email to be a bit more informal, and it is more, it's less formal than a letter, but email is now our form of letter writing. So we still have to remember that even email should still be grammatically correct. And have a little bit more thought put into it. So we're not just writing it out willy-nilly, although of course everyone sends last-minute emails. But emails are now letters, and that's our official, mostly our formal form of correspondence. So we can't forget about writing when it comes to emails. I think with WhatsApp and Messenger, I think we have to remember to be professional. Now, I think in terms of writing, grammar, punctuation, things like that, you can be a little bit looser with that on WhatsApp and Messenger, because it's sort of the expected. But I think that I say that with a lot of caution, because you don't want it to be all emojis and no punctuation when you're writing to your supervisor. But I think they'll forgive you if you misspell something by accident, but you do have to be careful. And especially if you're writing to, let's say, you're going to court and you're writing to opposing counsel to say that you're going to be late. Now, opposing counsel is going to, and maybe you wouldn't do this, but perhaps I've done it before. I've had to do it before. You always have to remember who's going to be sort of surveying you on the other side, who's going to be paying attention. So, and what's the impression you want to make? So whether it's opposing counsel or maybe a new client, you want to make sure that you're as professional as possible. So I wouldn't let our standards drop too much in terms of chats and texting and other apps like that.
Great. That's sort of the questions that I had. Yeah, I noticed on Grammatica, your website, Rebecca, you've got this course. Is it live yet? I thought, just again, I'm not trying to plug Rebecca's company, but it is an interesting sort of course where you have workshops dedicated to helping people who want to open their own practice as a solo practitioner. I think that's actually really valid, because sometimes here's what happens, right? People go through the NCA process and maybe they get their articling abridged or even exempted, and they don't have that practice experience in Canada. And now, it may be hard for you to get a job because you don't have practice experience. So they might say, well, I'm going to go solo. Maybe I'll start with real estate, transactional work. I'll start there. But there's a lot involved in setting up practice. So I know it's not strictly legal communication, but maybe I'm interested genuinely in what is that all about, that course?
Yeah, so I consider that falls into sort of like legal skills, really, and it's the kind of professional development stuff that you don't really see in a formal law school course or law school program. This came out of after a couple of years of giving my own practice a go and realizing I wish I had learned this. I started this course, and again, it was a 3-part workshop series, and it was live, and so I'm working to put that online. And so we go through everything from business plans and starting budgets to bookkeeping and auditing and case management. So I really enjoy teaching it because it's really practical and down to earth and gets you right into it. And I think for a lot of people, like you say, whether they've gone through the NCA process or not, it is, lawyers are in this really unique position to start out and use their own, sorry, I'm just moving because my little girl just woke up, and if she sees me, she is going to come running. But I'm also trying to find the right light in here. So I think that you have to, we're in this unique position where we can open up our own practice and set up shop whenever. So it's not ideal for some, but it's a possibility. So you can always have a job really as a lawyer once you're licensed. And I think in the UK, you can't do that until you have so many years of experience at the gate. But in Canada, that's not the case for the most part. As far as I know, in every province, you can just start your own practice. So that was the idea behind the course, just to give people a bit of a primer on what they should be considering when they start. And knowing me, there'll probably be something about legal writing in there, how to draft a clean retainer, make sure you get all of your templates right the first time, things like that.
That's a good plug. I like that one. So a question from me is, so you say, in the courses you've been doing and your time teaching, you've obviously reviewed a lot of law students and bar students' documents. What are, say, like the biggest common issue that you see, like the one that as soon as you open the document, you're like, there it is again, that people could like practice on their own?
So I think when it comes to academic work, like if you're writing a paper for a program, and I think some people are going to be doing an LLM, the biggest thing that's missing there is a thesis or an overarching argument. That is probably the most common error that I see in legal academic writing. And I would say the same thing goes for, you know, submissions to court or letters to opposing counsel. And it was what I was saying before, that you always want to make sure that you understand what your main point is, so that it comes across to the reader. They don't have to search through a bazillion paragraphs and a whole bunch of citations to understand what really do you want to say. So in academic legal writing, it would be, you know, not having a thesis, or only coming to sort of, you know, a one central argument at the end in the conclusion. And so it's sort of like a really long hypothesis without ever really understanding what they're after. And then when it comes to sort of more practical legal writing, like memos and things like that, I would say it's the biggest mistake is that it's generally a bit messy. And I'd say that means like it's been submitted without having a proofread. And I think proofreading, you should do 3 proofreads. One for content and logic to make sure that you have all of the right stuff in there. The second for flow, so that it makes sense from a structural point of view. And the third for grammar. And then again, you should probably do a 4th one for grammar and spelling to make sure that it's clean and neat. And that's where things like Grammarly will come into play. I think that if you don't have the structure, then it's going to be messy. And also another thing I'd say is a lot of lawyers coming from abroad to Canada will find that Canadian lawyers love headings and we use them all the time, and we make a heading and make a subheading. It just goes on and on and on. And so I would, you know, it's a really small tip, but I would just encourage those listening to make note of that. So yeah, so it can be messy in terms of structure. It can be messy in terms of grammar and spelling and writing, and just remembering to keep it polished, really, and also according time in your sort of planning to do the polishing.
Yeah, it's a super valid point. Giving yourself enough time to actually go through and review everything, especially, you know, once you're in practice. It's so easy, right? The next job's coming in and you've got a, you know, the partner or your principal is screaming at you, I need that right now, I need that right now. And so you're like, here, just have it, take it. And then afterwards you're like, oh, look at that silly mistake.
Yeah, exactly.
Like right in the first
yeah, just even an hour just to quickly go through it will make a big difference.
I think that's some great tips there for everybody. Does anybody else have a question for Rebecca or for Anton? Can ask them about their experience. I find it fascinating. You've lived in so many different countries and got to experience so many different types of law.
Yeah, I've been very lucky in that regard. Yeah.
Carmen, do you want to ask a question?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi Rebecca, hi. Thanks a lot. I agree with you that grammar is actually really important. But I have a feeling that we're talking about, like in today's seminar, that we're all being a student, or we're getting our work corrected by supervisors or partners. So we're going on the assumption that all partners or all supervisors are actually really good with grammar.
Yes, great.
And because I've had experience working with someone who makes grammatical mistakes, like a supervisor who makes grammatical mistakes, and it's actually quite a, you know, if you have a subordinate who tells you that you're making grammatical mistakes, it might be a tough pill to swallow at times.
For sure.
Yeah. So when you're in that sort of situation, then, I mean, with your experience,
yeah,
how would you communicate that with your supervisor? At least tell them that, well, no, this isn't right, but you can't really tell them directly that this is wrong, it's bad grammar. But when it comes to grammar, I mean, it's either right or wrong, isn't it?
Yeah. So I've been in that position as an articling student, and it was tough. So what I ended up doing was I would spot the mistakes. I would sort of take note of the mistakes that my supervisor would make, and I'd try to correct them before they got to her. So I'd make sure that my work didn't have those mistakes in them. And then hopefully she wouldn't add it, thinking it was correct. But if it's really tricky. I think maybe ask, rather than confront them, just say, you know, I notice that you keep doing this. You keep putting a comma here. I've never seen that before. Why? Like, is that a grammar rule? Like, is that, or, you know, I've noticed that this comes up a lot in your writing. Can you explain, should I be doing that too? And maybe they haven't noticed it themselves, or maybe they think that it's correct, and you'll give them an opportunity. You'll be able to say, well, actually, I always thought that it should go here. And it's more of a conversation rather than, I think you're making mistakes. That's how I would approach it. It may not work that way. But depending on, you know, what would happen when I was articling is I would draft something. I'd pass it to my supervisor, the sort of partner of the firm. She would do her thing, and then she'd give it to a sort of junior associate to finalize it and send it off. And so me and the junior associate would be like, did you see that? And we would correct it between the two of us. So I don't know if there's something like that you can do, where there's, you know, the executioner, I call them, the person responsible for finalizing something can fix it as well. But yeah, I would just say start it off as like a conversation rather than a confrontation.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
It's always so tricky doing that 365 feedback to somebody, which is what it's called in the lingo world, apparently, when you give feedback to someone who's more senior than you are. Because of course, you know, you're always trying to, you know, not tread on people's toes, and you want to still come across as being professional and supportive and helpful, and not be that annoying, picky person. So it really is challenging for people, myself included. And it comes down to that relationship that you build with that person, but also with the rest of your team and how they navigate it. So that might be worth asking if you're in that situation.
Definitely.
Maybe their assistant or their secretary, if they still have a secretary, and asking how they do it. And you'll probably find they just fix it and don't tell them.
Yeah, exactly.
A great question. Does anyone else have a question for Rebecca? Otherwise, it's quite early in the morning for her, so she probably would like to go and have breakfast. In that case, Rebecca, Anton, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you, and this morning for you. Thank you for sharing your tips. Legal research and writing is very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now. Because sometimes it is one of the first ways that we get to showcase ourselves and our skill, especially when we're applying for a position. So it's really, really helpful. I'm so glad that you gave the tip about cover letters as well, because that's really key. And I'm sure we could go into so much more detail about.
Oh yeah, we could do a whole hour on that.
I did happen to notice that on Rebecca's website, there's a link in the comments, and I will put the link as well in the feedback from this session for everybody. She does actually offer a resume writing session. So you may want to check that one out along with everything else that you guys are doing right now. So thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really helpful. Anton, Rebecca, hope we'll see you again. Best of luck with the Toronto School of Management course. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing where you guys take it and all the opportunities that you have for everybody. And for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was great to have you with us. We are back tomorrow at our usual time of 5 p.m. Pacific. That is 8 p.m. Eastern for those of you on the East Coast or anywhere in between. And we have a session with Rachel Sachs, who is a solo practitioner in Ontario and a member of the executive board of the CBA WLF, and she's going to come and talk to you guys tomorrow. And then we have sessions every week going forward until the December, when we will take a mini break in December and then we'll come back raring to go in January. But for those of you writing exams right now, we are all thinking of you. Rebecca, Anton, and myself have all got our hands on your backs, saying you guys can do this. You'll get through the next 2 weeks, we promise. And hopefully we'll be celebrating you guys as much as we're celebrating those who've just joined the bar this week. Yeah. And so we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Bye, everybody.
Bye.